شاي ترى قبل لا اقعد بسرعه روح اشرب شاي ولا تروح؟ لا خليك قاعد ان شاء الله صح انه في كفايه.
Distinguished delegates, can I please request you to have your seats? Thank you. If you will settle down, we would like to get started sooner rather than later. Thank you. Let me begin by extending a very warm welcome to all of you. As the current president of the IPU, it is my pleasure to you to present the two candidates from whom you will choose as to who is going to be my successor. And so we have both of the candidates. To my left is Gabriela Cubas-Baron from Mexico. Gabriela, thank you for coming. And on the other side, we have Yvonne Posada from Uruguay. So one thing we know for sure, as I also mentioned during the inaugural ceremony, that whichever candidate it is, we know that it is going to be a woman. So, and I'm very happy that we have this situation. Of course, the IPU presidency, I think, is, and I'm not saying this because I am the current president, I think it's a very special responsibility in a fantastic organization. And over the past 3 years, we have actually carried this organization forward together as a team. I don't think anyone would claim any individual credit. The fact that we have progressed and we have moved as much as we have is really because of the great coordination, the great understanding, and the great respect that we have had for each other. The President working with the Secretariat, the membership supporting fully, and determining the direction of the organization. Let me also say, and I speak from my own experience, and also with regard to what the IPU statutes actually say as to what is the role of the President. The President is the political head of the organization, the political head of the organization. And the IPU, as we know, is essentially a political organization. We are also a member-driven organization. So we try to be, the Secretariat tries to be guided by what is the wish of the membership, the direction the membership would like to see the organization take. And so it is very important that the two organs, if you like, work together. When I took over as the president of the IPU in 2014, just prior to that, Martin Chungong was elected as the Secretary General. And if I may say so in all parliamentary candor, this is the first time that we had a combination where you had a president from Asia Pacific and you had a Secretary General from Africa. There might have been some concerns as to how well this new partnership and combination can deliver, because the leadership had never been out of, let us say, of Europe or the more developed countries. I think, and you will be the judge of that, we have done a pretty good job. No one is perfect, but we did take the organization forward as much as we could take it to. So here we are. I'm almost at the end of my term. So tomorrow, after the assembly is concluded, I will have finished my responsibilities as the 28th president, and then the 29th president of the IPU will take over. We also meet at a time when I think the world is going through a lot of changes. And it reflects very well on the membership of the IPU that we have been able to keep up with those changing times. Not only keep up, I think we have been able to make our presence felt. We have raised the profile of the organization. We have brought greater transparency to the work that we do. Within an organization, we have improved our outreach. We have embraced innovation, technology to try and get our messages across. And also in terms of the UN processes, we are as closely involved as we have ever been. And of course, the membership is at its highest ever. We have already accepted 3 new members, as you know, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Vanuatu. There'll be some more good news tomorrow during the Council, when we will also hopefully accept a recommendation to accept the Marshall Islands as a member of the IPU. So that is actually going to take our count to 177 members. So just over a period of 3 years, we will have added 11 new members. And of course, as that pool gets smaller, because we are reaching to the limit, we are reaching to the optimum of how many members we can have, it becomes a much more challenging task. So an organization that is moving forward, an organization that has a higher profile, an organization that is more respected than ever before, an organization that is also appreciated by the international community, by the United Nations, and of course by the governments of the world. So this is a time when we are going to choose a new president. I'm delighted that we have 2 excellent candidates amongst us. I know both of them very well. I've had personal interactions with both, and from them you're going to choose. What we have tried to do, and I've tried to bring in my own experience to this from my candidacy, is we have brought forward the election to being, instead of the last agenda item on the closing day, it's going to be the first agenda item on the last day. So tomorrow morning, the Governing Council is going to sit at 9 o'clock. At 9:30, the elections will begin. The process of elections will begin. And hopefully this will give a greater number of delegations a chance to vote. Given that parliaments also run on tight budgets, a lot of the delegations leave on the last day. So we hope that by bringing this forward, we are actually allowing more of you to participate in that process. Also, this question I've been asked a few times, you will actually be voting for an individual. That is important for you to understand. Of course, the individual has an identity. So when I ran, I'm from the Parliament of Bangladesh, but your vote is for an individual, not for a country or a parliament. And the reason for that is accountability lies with the individual and not with the institution of parliament from which that individual comes. I know there have been issues, there have been some communication on various media. Let me be very clear. There are no issues whatsoever with regard to the eligibility of the 2 candidates to take part in the election. So both of the candidates are fine. There are no issues of eligibility. There are no issues of term. So they are both good, they are both eligible, and you can go ahead in that full confidence. The format that we have today, and this is again a new format. We have not had this in the past. When I was running for a president, we had to interact with the geopolitical groups. When one of the candidates was in the room, the other candidate wasn't. You had to put on headphones so you couldn't hear what the other person was saying. But we believe in transparency as a parliamentarian. So I think it's better to have both of them, and you are welcome to ask any questions. No statements, please. No reading out of any statements that you will have prepared. Just very specific questions. My job as the moderator, number 1, is to keep time, because we have another very tantalizing cultural delight in store for us later today. We'll be going to the ballet at 8 o'clock, so I would like to finish well before that and give you enough time to go. So we will start off with the 2 candidates, both speaking for 7 minutes. First, it will be Yvonne, you will be going first. We had a toss of the coin, and so I don't know how many of you are familiar with cricket, but this is what you do to decide who is going to go first, or having the option of going first. So Yvonne actually won the toss, so she has decided to speak first. She'll be speaking first. Then it will be Gabriela, and I hope they will use that 7 minutes to articulate their vision of the presidency. What they would do as a president, how they see this organization, how they wish to take it forward. So once they have articulated that vision, then we will open the floor to questions. If, having heard the answer to a question, you desperately want to ask a follow-up, and if it's relevant, of course, as moderator, I will allow that. But initially, we would like to allow as many new individuals as possible to ask the questions. Are we all clear on the format? Yep. Okay. So now I would first invite Yvonne Posada. All of the materials have been distributed. Let me also say that the Secretariat has made available offices for both of the candidates, because our job is not really to promote one candidate or the other. It is to create a level playing field so that you as delegates have the best chance to decide who is the best candidate in your view. So Yvonne will speak first. Yvonne, you have 7 minutes, and then I will request Gabriela to speak, and then we will move on to the Q&A session. Thank you very much again for your presence, for your attendance, and I hope that we are going to have a vibrant and interesting and even exciting Q&A thereafter. Thank you.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, fellow parliamentarians. Thank you for coming to listen to the two of us. Thank you, President. Thank you, Secretary General. Thank you, Gabi. We are here to speak to you. Each of us will speak to you to describe why we're standing. I feel at home here. The IPU feels like family. It's like meeting old friends. I've worked with many of you. I may be meeting some of you for the first time. But I shall also take that as a challenge, should you see fit to make me President of the IPU. From 2010 to 2017, I've attended all assemblies of the IPU. So from 2010 until the present, I was in the Executive Committee. Some of you will recall that. That was from 2012 to 2014. And there were 2 occasions on which the committee decided unanimously that I could stand as Vice President of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. I was also in the Women's Committee up until 2014. And time permitting, I would also like to address the importance of that committee. I was also in the organizing committee for the Conference of Presidents in 2014, and that experience was very helpful to me. It was a learning process for me, and it also made it clear to me that it was possible to learn about the realities of national experience from parliamentarians, from working alongside you. I am committed to the IPU. My parliament is committed to the IPU. My parliament is so committed to the IPU that all the political parties in it are supporting my candidacy. That includes the opposition. Luis Alberto Heber, chair of the National Party, in other words, the opposition party in my parliament, Felipe Carpaccio, who is a member of the other party, and Rodriguez Momo, who's also a member of the Senate for a different party. So that gives you some idea of how democracy works and how politics works in Uruguay. We may be a small country, but we do not have any conflict with any other country. And we promote peace, democracy, and defense. And we support human rights and freedom. Several people have asked me questions about that. Let me say, I reject any attitude that would mean that any country or government were to have political prisoners. I promote freedom, peace, and security. That's what I stand for. That's what I promote. Uruguay has a place in the UN Security Council, and it always stands for these values in international fora. I am delighted to note that this is one of the most well-attended assemblies that have been held, and that will be true whoever the next president is. All we know is that it will be a woman by lunchtime tomorrow, and that is the most important outcome in my view, that after 128 years there's only been one woman president, and there will be another woman president of the IPU. The president has said that we have grown. That's good news. We must continue growing. We must include more parliaments. That's something that we have in our work program. In my own regional grouping, GRULAC, we also need to bring more parliaments on board. They're not all on board yet. I was invited to attend a US Congress. I went to Washington in June, not to talk to the administration, but to talk to parliamentarians on an equal playing field to discuss issues with members of the US Congress from across the political spectrum, because we need to hear the views of parliamentarians, we need to listen to their voices, and we need to have a parliamentary dialogue. Why a woman? Not just because she's a woman, although that is important in itself, and of course there are many women around the world in terms of the world population, but there's another reason. Women are good negotiators. That has been demonstrated. Women can open up helpful dialogue. Women and peace in peacekeeping missions. If you look at the way in which women work in the area of striving for peace, you can see different results, you can see different achievements. Unfortunately, governments tend to have few women in cabinets when there are conflicts, and of course conflicts do unfortunately keep arising around the world, and they tend not to have been caused by women. Women and men need to keep working together for peace. I'm running out of time. I think I've already been told I only had 1 minute left, so we can carry on discussing some of these issues in the Q&A session. I'll just end with one point. Looking at the work program, one of the things I'd like to do is to set up a political forum for parliamentarians. The IPU says that if you have more women, you can do better politics. We need more politics in order to have better democracies. That means more conversations going on with more parliaments involved. Very often conflicts are tackled by governments, by the executive body. They often don't know what to do. That's where parliaments should be present. We should be present. We could use the wonderful platform that the Inter-Parliamentary Union has and use that platform for dialogue, for democracy, and in order to facilitate meetings between all parties. Rest assured, in me you will find a hard-working woman who will do her utmost to be very careful with our funds, because those funds belong to the people who contribute them, and we will be accountable to them, to the people, for how we use that money. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. I now request Gabriela to share her vision of a possible future presidency. And you will have 9 minutes because Yvonne actually used up 9 minutes instead of 7. So we will have the same for Gabriela. You have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, Secretary General, dear speakers, dearest colleagues, Razia prestabila siem parlamentaria.
Russia has introduced to all the parliamentary its history, its magnificence, and opened its heart to us. Thanks for welcoming us to St. Petersburg.
Dos terribles terremotos.
There have been 2 terrible earthquakes, and although we suffered those, it did help to receive words of solidarity, support and affection from other countries in the world. So thank you all for that support.
It's time where Mexico is presenting a candidacy for the presidency of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. The spirit of this candidacy has been to consolidate an inclusive multilateralism as the space for dialogue, for building peace, and of course, very important for parliamentarians to work in that very important task. Multilateral dialogue represents the very best opportunity to generate, in one side, these conditions for dialogue, for stability, for sustainable peace, but also it represents the great opportunity for parliamentarians to translate the international instruments that our governments are negotiating, signing, and in a majority we have to ratify. We have to translate all these huge agreements, such as the Paris Agreement of climate change, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, and some other instruments that are very important for the world. We need to really translate those big, big agreements into national law, into public policy, and into budget. That's the way people are going to have a benefit from all these external or international affairs. If we really want to make something for the people we represent, we really need to endorse these very important agreements and to make that local translation. IPU has a very important role in this very important goal, because we are the voice of all the voices in the world. And I am saying this because we represent the plurality. We represent different cultures, political parties, different religions, different ethnic groups. We represent the plurality far beyond even of the representation of the governments. We are the voice of all the voices of the world. That, my colleagues, that is the best challenge we can have as parliamentarians, and we must use that very important work to deliver very good results. I am a woman who believes in honesty as a motto for life. I have always worked hard, defending my convictions and standing to my responsibilities. I am convinced that transparency and accountability are the core principles for democracy. My personal philosophy: the person should be put in the center of every public decision. We need to understand that the decisions we make are going to have a huge impact in the persons. For me, politics is an opportunity for convergence within diversity. For me, politics, dialogue constitutes a mandate. That's why we are in politics. I am convinced that societies, if we really want to make more inclusive societies, we need to understand democracy and human rights into our shared priority. I come from a Spanish-speaking country, I've been learning English since some years ago. Le premier engagement est très personnel.
My first commitment is an entirely personal one. I had the honor of meeting several of you at the Parliamentary Assembly of French-speaking countries, and I learnt French in order to be able to communicate with you directly and speak to French-speaking parliamentarians.
Não pode ter somente duas línguas oficiais, o espanhol, o português e o árabe.
Non-official languages being spoken.
De pessoas em todo o mundo. E também devem ser da nossa organização. E vou trabalhar incansavelmente para que a UIP nos faça sentir em casa. Our proposals for a working plan. We need to build the IPU for the 21st century. The world is changing. We need to do so. We need to be an IPU with transparency, efficient, inclusive, and of course, well communicated. If we really want to have more women and more young parliamentarians, we need to change our strategy. We have been achieving very good results in terms of new countries joining the IPU. Of course, we are increasing in terms of women parliamentarians, young parliamentarians. But that's not enough. Our president has been saying a lot of times that we need to understand that now half of the population has less than 30 years old. We need to understand that they deserve to be included in our organization and in our parliaments. Of course, under this line, I wish, of course, to underline one that is very important for me, the women's parliamentarians. That group, which is really strong and with a very strong leadership, needs to be, of course, encouraged to go to other parliaments, to other national parliaments, to ask women parliamentarians to join our beloved organization. I'm sure that we're going to have very good results in our Women's Parliamentarian Forum. IPU should be always at the service of parliamentarians. We need programs for capacity building. We need, of course, to be close and to have, in order of this capacity building, more seminars, more spaces, for example, to understand better international law, some tools for communications, social media. Again, the world is changing. We need to find new strategies and new tools to do a better job as parliamentarians. Third, we need an IPU useful for the national parliaments. Useful in terms of communication, of course, but, and this is a Belgian proposal, we need to develop the app that now we are using for the assemblies in a complete all-the-year app in terms of being a platform with information about us, about the directory. It's a surprise that we haven't done a directory of the organization, but also about the things we are working with. If we really want to have more cooperation, we need to start being friends. We need to start knowing what the other parliamentarians who are just beside us are working in their countries. We need to exchange the best practices. We need, of course, to understand that we are a huge team. Four, IPU as a global actor. We need to work really close with the United Nations. We need to make proposals to give all the opinion that we represent to that very important space. Of course, we are politicians. I am in a campaign. I want to ask for your vote tomorrow morning, but also I want to ask you for your minds, for your hands, and for your hearts, and not only for tomorrow. I want to ask you for the next 3 years. If we really want to achieve all these results, and of course, this strategic plan of the IPU, we need to work hand by hand, heart by heart, for democracy, for everyone. Shukran.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. We have heard both of the candidates. We have given them equal time. Initially, we had set it at 7 minutes. Then it was revised to 9. So if you would please raise, I see Nigel from the United Kingdom. Let's take questions in threes, and if you can specify who the question is to. I also acknowledge Kuwait. Do you have your card holding up there? Okay, let's start with Nigel, and then we'll come on to Kuwait. Nigel from the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Seba, and from all of us, thank you for what you have done as president of our organization. We're extremely grateful and wish you well for the future. My question is directed at both of them, and that is that we had the emergency resolution about the appalling genocide that is existing in Myanmar and the hundreds of thousands of people who are being made refugees. But of course, there are other emergencies that are occurring in the world as well, and we could clearly have spoken about some of the others that were put forward, especially what's happening to the democracy in Venezuela. Would both of you commit to looking at the processes of the assembly structure in order that other important and vital emergencies are at least being able to be debated properly at our assemblies?
Thank you. So that's a question to both of them, and we'll start with Gabriela because Yvonne went first. Let me take the question from Kuwait, and then I acknowledge Namibia. Kuwait, your question, please, and New Zealand, of course, here. Just write
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanking you for a great 3 years that we have witnessed the great work, and wishing you all the best. For our two great candidates, I'm very happy to see two female candidates, two women parliamentarians are on a stand today. And my question, and I need a direct, forward, straight answer from both. IPU is not a club with members. IPU is not a social gathering. IPU should be a heavyweight political antenna. What are you going to do in regards to changing few articles of association where we can be able, as IPU, have the power to actually obstruct certain countries that would harm their people, like the issues we have discussed before? What would you do to change a few articles in the Article of Association in order to have a more powerful impact on IPU and therefore would be recognized heavily by everybody in the globe? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. Namibia, Margaret.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much to the two formidable women, phenomenal women. And thank you, Mr. President, for really taking care of this institution as leader of the ship. You have directed us very well. I want to congratulate the two ladies for really putting up a very good campaign. And to say that as the President of Women, I'm especially very proud to have two women candidates. And whoever wins, both can't win, we will all support you. And you have won for the women, not only for yourself. Mr. President, my question is, Resolution 1325 of the United Nations Security Council speaks very frankly about women's inclusion in peace building and peacekeeping. And if whoever becomes the president, what are you going to do to enable the IPU to be peace builders and peacekeepers in all these countries where mostly women and children are suffering most? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to now turn to the candidates, and then I also have written down New Zealand, Uganda, Seychelles. Is there anyone else? Okay, we'll take the next three after this. David, I'll come back to you. So the first question was from Nigel Evans from the United Kingdom, and he asked the question of both of the candidates. Gabriela, would you like to go first?
Estamos acostumbrados
Thank you. In our organization, we are accustomed to give all the weight to the emergency issues. However, we do have to do political work in our committees as well. If we could look at a number of different topics, because, you know, there are a lot of us here, if we were able to look seriously and in depth at a number of emergency issues, well, perhaps we could. We've got the Human Rights Committee, for example, looking at Venezuela. That could do that. There are other committees that could look at other issues as well. I mean, I'm referring again to Venezuela, and then there is the committee dealing with the respect and the promotion of international humanitarian law. Now, there's another issue there for Venezuela. I think we need to strengthen that, and I think that we need to use our committees more frequently, see what they would allow us to do on an ad hoc basis, and see how we could deal with all the issues that arise. And of course, we have got to be open to the fact that the world is changing. There aren't only going to be 2 crises a year, are there? It's very likely that there will be times when politics fails us, and I think we do need to be able to tackle more than one emergency issue, yes.
Thank you, Gabriela. Yvonne, with regard to the question from Nigel Evans of the UK.
Sí, cómo no.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Well, without doubt, we have these assembly meetings when we choose an emergency topic, which is a very important point to do globally when we decide together what is the salient issue, and because it is something that is urgent, that needs to be dealt with immediately, as has been said, and that is what we do. We look at something and we address it and decide on it in the Assembly. The structure that the IPU has and the work that we do on the protection of human rights and the human rights of parliamentarians as well gives us an advantage that is different to that in any other type of organization. And we do need to work much more on that. We need to include more topics, yes, but we do need to be able to follow up more than simply doing it from one assembly to the next. In the particular issue of Venezuela, I do think that the IPU, from the beginning of the problem emerging in Venezuela, has expressed their views. We have been there, we have commented on it, and in the committees as well. And then there are the democratic commitments that we have to respect as well. There are those of us who are part of Mercosur, for example, as are a number of other countries present here, and suspension has been applied that is going to be lifted. This according to the statutes of the Mercosur agreement, and this will be done when it is felt that they have complied with the restoration of the system. And this, as I say, in accordance with the statutes of Mercosur. This is something that our Chancellery have been looking at, and our government as well as our parliament. Thank you very much.
Before I move on, Nigel, is there a follow-up that you have? Thank you. Move on to the question from Kuwait, from our sister in Kuwait. Why don't you go first, Yvonne, and then I'll come to Gabriela.
Sí, creo que la Unión.
Thank you very much. I think the IPU carries out an important policy, which is the respect for all these states. And that is something that we have to carry on with. And within the framework of the IPU itself, we have to look at reaching more agreements amongst ourselves inside a dialogue that brings us closer together. I am sure that we are all faced with situations that we need to tackle, and this is something that we have got to do. The previous presidency did, and the future will as well. But there is also work for the chairs of the geopolitical groups to do as well. That is a role that gives the person who has that role room for maneuver as well. They can do an awful lot. They can be an awful lot more active in the territory in question, and they can do this through following the work of the IPU in a number of different areas. I think we can't just stick to what we do at assembly meetings. I think that all of us have to make sure that we shoulder the responsibility that we all have here within the IPU. Thank you.
Gabriela.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I'm also very pleased to know that we're making history at this meeting. It's not just that tomorrow we'll have our new president elected, but that we do have an election with 2 women candidates. It is an election between 2 women, and I think that that really is something that has been achieved by the women of the IPU, and I think, as I say, we're making history. Now, we have to understand also that this is a political organization. It is an organization that has to take decisions. It has to tackle issues that may be uncomfortable. But we cannot simply follow these passively. We can't close our eyes to what is happening here and there around the world. It is really important that we understand the political nature of this organization, an organization that brings together parliamentarians from around the world. If we don't understand that political nature of the body, then we can carry on with our resolutions, we can carry on with our work in committees, but we won't really be doing very much to build a planet that is more inclusive and that is more respectful of human rights and of international law as well. We have got to move out of just the common areas that we have, the areas that we know, and we've got to go out there and do more. Let's do politics. Let's do more politics. And I think that there are issues that we can include in the work program as well. It's very easy to take a decision from your desk, isn't it? It's very easy to think about what you're going to read in the newspaper headlines. But let's get out there. Let's go out there to see what is actually happening with people on the ground and political players on the ground. I think that we really do have to go out there, see things with our own eyes so that we can get better, more informed, more intelligent decisions taken. And certainly there will be more effective ones, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Namibia. Sorry, did you have a follow-up question, Kuwait? Do the responses satisfy you? Okay. Move on to Namibia. Margaret. And who will go first? Yvonne? Would you like to go first? This is on Security Council Resolution 1325.
Yes, thank you. Personally, this is something that I am committed to and I have been working on for a number of years now. Just a couple of months ago, together with another senator who was the chair of the Women's Assembly, we met the defense ministers of the region and met with women who were in those ministries or who actually were part and parcel of peacekeeping missions. We discussed this with Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay as well was there. And we talked about the need to have training, special training when it comes to gender violence that happens in countries when there are peacekeeping missions. Now, we do have to comply with this resolution, and it's important because the results show that when there are women in these missions, when women have contacts on the ground on these missions, they get to know the women, the children there. When that happens, the results are different. And we really want to have women who are more committed, women who really are getting involved and imposing themselves in these situations so that these declarations don't stick at being just declarations, but that we really do tackle the situation. We have to have women there alongside men, but we have to have women in these places so that they can do what they do. And we are working on this in our region, and I think that the IPU really does need to carry on tackling this issue, but go into it in even greater depth. And also do something about the fact that when there are such conflicts, usually the first to die are women and children. And that is something that we really need to do something about. And I think women have an awful lot to say about this. Thank you.
Thank you. And over to Gabriela.
Thank you, Mr. President. Peacekeeping and peace-building operations are, I believe, one of the most important programs for UN, and also for those countries and communities where they are being held. Of course, a lot of women and even children are suffering, in some cases, tragic abuses. And we need to address that issue, but also we need to do something about that. First of all, again, we need to go to the field. We need to go and see how these peace-building operations are being held in the different operations. Of course, it's not going to be easy. We need to work closely to UN, to the Peacekeeping Office, and to design a strategy to allow us to make a very good accountability in terms of the way they are being developed, and about also of the resources and the results. There are very good peacekeeping operations, but also there is a very important follow-up that I believe we can do. If we really want to have sustainable peace, if we really want successful peace-building operations, we need to understand the value of institutions. If we are not capable of creating strong and useful institutions, there's never going to be a sustainable peace in that place. So what we also can do as an organization of the parliamentarians of the world is to have cooperation and to strengthen cooperation in very specific places to develop stronger parliaments. Many of our parliaments are very old. Other ones are very new. Our development as countries and societies and institutions, it's really different. If we can strengthen the cooperation between the parliaments, and particularly in those countries which are suffering conflict, or those countries which are having peacekeeping or peace-building operations, I believe that we can be more useful. So I think that should be a challenge as an organization. But of course, a very important part of this is to speak with women in the field. I had the opportunity to go about 3 years ago to Jordan as IPU, and we organized some meetings with women refugees. And the problems and the challenges that they are facing are really different than the ones that men suffer, or even sometimes in the case of children. So we need to have very specific programs, and I insist, cooperation with UN, cooperation with the countries, and of course, between the parliaments. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may just also exercise my rights as a moderator and ask both of you, we are talking about peace building. Do you think, and this is a question to both of you, Gabriela and Yvonne, the IPU should be playing a greater role in terms of prevention? Preventing a conflict is better than addressing the issues of peace thereafter. And how would you approach this whole subject of prevention, whether it is conflicts, whether it's climate change, disasters? So to you, how important is that as a concept, prevention, and how would you try to use the mechanisms available within the IPU to ensure prevention?
Of course, I want to add to peace-building concept, of course, the sustainable peace concept and the SDGs. If we see now UN agenda, they have been trying to make a complete, really integrated concept, because it's not to have a precise intervention. It is really to make a change. That's a challenge, to make a real and sustainable change. And that's, again, about SDGs and sustainable peace. We need to incorporate the different areas of building strong institutions. If we don't have strong institutions, nothing is going to happen. And I mean, of course, strong parliaments and strong governments, but of course, better legislation. If we don't have good law, we are not going to have good governments, respect for human rights, strong democracies or institutions. If we really want peace to stay long a time, we need to change our approach. Of course, on peace-building operation, that's a challenge, to make institutions. I believe that IPU has a lot to say about that. We know how to make better laws. We know how to build strong institutions. We know all the tasks that we have to do to implement SDGs and to create sustainable peace in all our countries, but particularly in those who are addressing conflict.
Thank you, Yvonne. Very briefly, if you could answer that.
La UIP, indudablemente.
Well, the IPU is without doubt a very particular global platform. It is unique. We have to develop the work that is being done within the UN itself. And as parliamentarians, as the IPU, we have to complement the work that is being done on Agenda 2030. And why? Because if we carry on with these social inequalities, economic inequalities, when there is conflict, we are not going to achieve peace. And we achieve peace also by keeping track of what we are all doing in our different parliaments. And I am convinced that the IPU, together with all its member parliaments, if they were to carry out permanent work looking for peace, working on peace, trying to make sure that we do reinforce legislation, the legislation that is agreed on by our government, and go beyond that, then we can do something. How can we ensure, though, that parliaments really do make sure that work is done and commitments are kept to, so that we have disarmament, for example? You can't just do that through declarations. You have to monitor the situation, and that is part of the role of the IPU. You have to monitor what is happening. There may be a government saying that they do not agree with something, but then there is no further control, no further oversight of that. And so we also have to have dialogue. Dialogue is absolutely essential. Dialogue is what brings about peace. And dialogue is really one of the initiatives of this IPU, dialogue between countries. And when we have countries in conflict and at war, it is through dialogue to look at how you can find a way out that it is achieved. And I think that we, as female candidates, but I'm referring to myself in particular, I think that we really do have a different role, a different way, perhaps, of looking at this, a different space in which to do that, one of rights, one of respect that we would have, and that we can stand alongside men to try to achieve this peace that we all long for. And I think it is through that sensitivity, that different view, I think, that we may be able to achieve something. We want to make sure that children do not die. want to ensure that when our governments reach agreements, they also understand that they need to be respected, and that has to be respected within parliaments as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to move on. David, I've been very patient. Please, go ahead.
David Carter, Speaker for the New Zealand Parliament. My question is to both candidates, and it's in regard to the role that you would see as President of the IPU, and indeed for the IPU itself, to support those smaller, struggling democracies before they get into real trouble. Well, I come from New Zealand, a very isolated country, but a country with a very strong democracy. But immediately north of us are countries like Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, which has just been now admitted to the IPU. Through no fault of their own, they are small democracies without a lot of institutional knowledge, small populations, often without a lot of resources. What role do you see you would play as President in assisting those democracies to strengthen themselves and to perform better for their own voters?
Thank you very much, David. I move on to Uganda. Uganda, you had a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. My first question to candidate Gabriela. Gabriela, as a candidate for IPU, and indeed IPU being a very strong institution, and you have offered your candidature, what do you think, if we don't vote for you as IPU, will miss in your character? What do you think, if we don't vote for you, that IPU as a strong institution will miss in you? Finally, we have heard about the peacekeeping missions and their roles they are doing. When we cross-check, among the IPU countries, it is Bangladesh, India, Ethiopia, who are leading providers of peacekeeping. If we give you a mandate, what role are you going to do to convince other IPU countries to participate in keeping peacekeeping missions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Uganda. So there are two questions. First is what we would miss out on from a candidate who has not been elected. That's your first question. And the second is how can we broaden the pool of countries that contribute to peacekeeping? Okay, thank you. And finally to the Seychelles, you had a question.
Thank you. I'm Charles Sukumamo from the Seychelles. You are elected, both of you, well, one of you, you're elected to be president of IPU. Just tell us two things, concrete, that you're going to do to help sort out the three issues you spoke about in your interventions, in your introduction, about conflict resolution, about transparency, and domestication of IPU policies. Thank you.
So what you would do in terms of the three issues, one is conflict, prevention, resolution. One is trying to have ownership of various resolutions that we have in terms of domestic policies. And the third one was on? Transparency. On transparency. So transparency governance. Okay, so first, David's questions. Gabriela, would you like to go first?
The issue of natural disasters and how to combat climate change has been a priority for Mexico, for the Latin American region, and more specifically for the Caribbean region. And of course, there are other regions around the world that are particularly concerned. Island states, not only in the Pacific, are particularly exposed to the effects of climate change. We have the Paris Accord on climate change. It is our obligation to ratify it, to change national legislation in order to ensure that it is transposed, and we can play a very important role in constant, ongoing monitoring and evaluation. That can be done by national governments, but legislative powers and parliaments can also do that. So the IPU can have a significant role there in terms of implementing the Paris Agreement and translating it into national legislation, public policy, and of course a budget.
Sorry, I think, David, if I understood your question right, your question was regard to what the candidates would do with regard to propping up fragile democracies. You said in New Zealand it was a very strong, vibrant democracy, but a lot of the countries such as Fiji, Vanuatu, and the others who have come in, they are experiencing many challenges. So the foundation for democracy is not as strong, and what the candidates would do. Yes? So the question is what you would do as a president to make the foundations of new democracies stronger.
Así lo entiendo.
Yes, that's how I understand it, and subsistence, survival is vital. That has been something that has affected us in Mexico too. In terms of strengthening democracy, many of our democracies are historic. They've been around for centuries. Others are more recent, and some are unstable. There is significant cooperation between governments and governmental organizations for strengthening and capacity building. But having a more systematic, integrated approach on a broader basis would be very helpful, both in parliamentary terms in general, but also in the Inter-Parliamentary Union. The IPU could be the ideal platform for creating cooperation programs. We could then exchange best practice between parliaments. The UK has some capacity building programs we could learn from. Romania too, China too. I think it would be wonderful to be able to pool that, look at good practice, and be inspired by them in our own parliaments, whilst also meeting the new challenges to democracy. For instance, the issue of new technologies, young people, and an electorate expecting very rapid answers.
Please.
Sí.
Yes, I believe that the IPU already has a structure which can allow for the promotion of and support for smaller states and more recently created states. There is a technical capacity within the institution, and I believe it should be used. The technical capacity is there. It is sound. We can use technology. It's necessary to have on-site visits as well, but it's also important to do it within existing budgets. We shouldn't be creating new plans that would create new expenditure for the institution. We can make better use of what we already have and what the IPU is already doing. There is a mechanism there, and I think one of the reasons why the IPU is successful at this is that when it's trying to strengthen democracy, it's clear that it's not trying to undermine the sovereignty of any given state. The IPU knows what growth is, what a democracy is, how it works, how a parliament works. That's clear. So that puts us in a position to do this because it's something that the IPU has been doing for some time. So I believe that there is a sound capacity there to do it.
Thank you. We move on to the question from Uganda. And Yvonne, if you would like to take that first, and then I'll go on to Gabriela. Uganda's question.
Las misiones de paz.
Uruguay, my country, plays a significant role in peace building and peacekeeping missions around the world. We've just withdrawn from Haiti. The reason for that was that the democratic process had to get underway. You can't stay forever in a peace-building mission. The UN carries out studies, and member countries stand by their commitments. Peace-building and peacekeeping missions have a very important role to play. There is no way around that. What the IPU can do, and what it indeed has been doing through its work, is to provide support for the democratic process. So if there's conflict, if democracy is at stake, we can help put the democracy back on its feet. And that is something that we've undoubtedly already been able to do.
There was a second question also, which, if I may say, is if you are not elected, what will the IPU miss out on? So what are the qualities that you bring, or you would have brought to the presidency had you been elected? Do you want? Yes.
Bueno.
Well, you'd miss out on my experience, my knowledge of the IPU. You'd miss out on my know-how to find my way around the organization. You have to tread carefully. I'm sure you know that, Mr. President. You know a lot about that. You have to know what different realities different individuals are facing. And you can't overstep your authority. There, I'm quite certain in what I've just said. And the other point that was in another question was transparency. This is another point of which I'm quite certain.
Gabriela, Uganda's questions, please.
Gracias.
Thank you. Peacekeeping operations, first. The UN has drawn up a very intelligent way of doing things, involving people, starting with cooperation and capacity building. That's about human rights, but it's also about technical capacity, bringing together the different groupings of countries. And there are also significant incentives in terms of the pay. What I think we need following that is ongoing contact with parliaments. There is more accountability in some countries than others. So supporting the UN with such work towards accountability is useful, because very often as parliamentarians we're deciding on budgets, we're deciding on public policy, and I think our awareness of these areas can feed into peacekeeping missions and ensure that better decisions are taken. If we take better decisions in our parliaments, then that will strengthen the role that we can play in such international missions. Sometimes we seem to be looking at what our governments are doing from somewhat of a distance. I think we should get a bit closer up. What would you miss out on? I think what I can contribute is commitment, being dynamic, making a major commitment. I've always tried to be close to people during this campaign. I tried to learn French so that I could talk to people better. I want to be close to people. I think it's better to work as a team. Several minds will do better than one. And I want to make us an IPU which is fit for purpose in the 21st century, which is effective, efficient, communicates well, and is well connected. The challenges of the 21st century are clear ones. And we need to modernize the organization, but we also need to modernize ourselves. And that's why I'm here, because I think I have something to offer. I think the person I am can offer you something. I've learned a lot from the IPU. The IPU has given me the opportunity to achieve constitutional reform in my own country, for example. I've seen these constant links between what this organization does and the people that we represent. So it would be a great honor for me to be able to contribute in that way.
Thank you, Uganda. That would actually have been a great last question, your second one. Let me move on to the Seychelles. So that's done. You've done the Seychelles, right? Okay. So we now go on to the next group of 3 questions. I see Paraguay, Namibia. I thought Margaret or Sudan. Okay. So I acknowledge these 3: Namibia, Paraguay, and Sudan.
Thank you. Speaker from the National Assembly of the Republic of Namibia, thank you very much to both of you for excellent presentations. My question to you is simply to say this. IPU is already doing so much to promote inclusiveness for young people, from the youth and young parliamentarians. I would like both of you to share your views as to what is missing from the current IPU initiatives. What else, what more do you see you bring into the organization in terms of promoting and strengthening what is currently being undertaken by IPU? Thank you.
Sorry, is that with regard to bringing more young people into politics or generally?
Well, encouraging member parliaments to...
So it's a general question, not just confined to the youth.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Shall we move on? Paraguay, you had a question?
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. I'm the second Deputy Speaker of the Assembly of Paraguay. We're going to have a new IPU President tomorrow, whether it's Yvonne or Gabriela. That will be up to the people voting. I don't want to ask you about proposals or ideas that you might have and what you will do if you're elected. We've already, in fact, been able to talk to you. You came to visit us, and all our political groupings in the Congress were able to ask you those sorts of questions. And everybody was asking you what you would do if you were elected IPU President tomorrow. Parliamentarians know that the President is the head of the body. So the new President elected tomorrow may have lots of wonderful ideas. You can have lots of wonderful ideas in your head, but if the body isn't working, then they're not helpful. So I'm going to turn this around a little bit. We know what your ideas are. We know what your proposals are. We know what your roadmap is for the organization, your roadmaps. So the question is, what would you do if you were elected tomorrow with the parliaments, the parliamentarians elected from different countries around the world?
What would they do with parliamentarians elected from different countries across the world? That's the question. Okay. Sudan?
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to both candidates who were indeed excellent in their speeches. What is the role of IPU in asserting that all member parliaments are treated on equal footing, and especially with regard to the implementation of international conventions? And I have another question. What is the role of IPU in making sure that the General Assembly of the United Nations can have resolutions that are binding and that the Security Council can be more of a legislative, or can have more of a legislative role, so that the Security Council does not have the monopoly over all powers. How can IPU work to reform this international system? And my last question is about the official languages of IPU. You have 2 official languages, which are French and English, whereas the United Nations has 6 official languages. Will the candidate that will be elected work to have, for instance, Arabic, Russian, and Chinese and Spanish added as official languages of IPU? Thank you.
Gabriela, shall we start with you and the question from Namibia?
The great challenge for this century is inclusion. I'm convinced of that. We've had a lot of economic inequalities, educational inequalities. There are inequalities in terms of food distribution between women and men. Those are our aims in terms of development. The 2030 agenda, those are the commitments that we should work towards as parliamentarians and more specifically in the IPU. So inclusion is something that we should have in the IPU, and what I mean by that is more countries represented in the IPU, but I also say this in the sense of having more women and more young people in the IPU. It is also a challenge to achieve an inclusive form of multilateralism. There are loud voices around the world speaking against multilateralism, speaking against global agreements, speaking against a planetary agenda. As parliamentarians, we have to defend multilateralism. And I would describe the multilateralism that we want to defend as inclusive. We want to ensure that we are representative. And talking about young people, you referred to briefly, I think it is also vital to include young parliamentarians, but also to include young people more generally in decision-taking processes in our different countries. If we don't have awareness raising, if we don't change society by working on this from childhood on, then what kind of future will politics have? We need better laws, better policy, better budgets, but we need all of those by taking inclusion as our starting point. So I'd say that's a vital starting point to make the IPU more inclusive and to have more official languages, to have more women in the organization, but also to ensure that this happens in national parliaments too. We need better communication, we need new technologies for talking to young people. Inclusiveness means going from words to deeds, and that will be the challenge for the next IPU term of office.
Yvonne, on the question from Namibia, please.
Bueno, primero creo.
First of all, I would say that if you are to achieve inclusion of young people in the IPU, you will need to include young people in national parliaments, because otherwise they'll never make it to the IPU. So the first thing we have to do is ensure our own houses are in order and that in national parliaments we are including young people. And as with women, if the political will is there, you can have promotion. It's not enough to put a law in place, you need to have the will. Another point that I was talking about the other day is how it can be helpful to do research into the age of members of different chambers or congresses. If you only have one chamber, what are the age differences? Are people different age in a different chamber, for instance, in the lower and upper chamber? Is the role the same? Does it matter if there's an age difference? there are inequalities there too in many, many parliaments. So these are initial things to start thinking about. Thanks to the IPU, we've had the achievement that there should always be a woman in every delegation. Is that something that parliaments could take further? Is this something where we could have a similar rule for young people, so that young people aren't only present in certain fora, but that we take this further? I wanted to make a point on language. I don't think we should give rise to additional expenditure for parliaments. Any such action would bring with it extra expenditure. I'd like to give you an example from our geopolitical group. So we have parliamentary representation of 650 million people from across a continent with the Spanish language. IPU documents come to us in English. And Uruguay managed to do something without any additional cost for the IPU. We have an international secretariat, and our regional grouping has a secretariat. They translate the documents and send them to all members of the parliamentary geopolitical grouping. So speaking a language is one thing, but it's also important for us to achieve a difference, make a difference, do something useful. And we could do our own translations, for instance, to achieve a different kind of communication. The Arab group has raised this point. How could we help without incurring any further expenditure? That would be my question.
Thank you. Move on to the question from Paraguay. Yvonne, do you want to go first, and then I'll come to Gabriela? What you would do with MPs or parliamentarians from around the world? That was the question.
Creo que de estas...
Well, I think the important thing that we need in these political spaces is a greater commitment that can come from the president's team, the executive committee. They all need to have that commitment, and all of the people providing technical assistance. But the crucial thing is that parliaments are comprised of parliamentarians, and it's up to parliamentarians to make a commitment to the IPU. Sometimes it is my impression that we ourselves are not promoting the IPU in the way we could. We don't have problems in terms of the ability to communicate. We've got a TV channel that's broadcasting everything that we're doing. And we could tune in and see what's happening in the Assembly. So that's there. But sometimes it's our own fault. We don't realize quite what potential what we have at our disposal has. What we could do if we had a greater commitment. We have a global platform. It puts us in a very special place. It puts us in a place where we can have these exchanges. The means are there. We can communicate thanks to new technology. And the IPU's already got the technology there.
Thank you. Gabriela, please.
Thank you very much. I am going to be sincere and ambitious. I expect a lot from myself, from the team at IPU, but of course from my colleagues. I've been asking in several meetings for your vote. That's a campaign. But if you want to really have a good presidency, and if you really want to make something useful for the world, you can do something with your own hands. But if you have the opportunity to lead the efforts of all the parliamentarians of the world, people with great charisma, people with strong leadership, people with hands, brains, and very good hearts, I believe that we can lead those efforts and to improve in a much better way every result we can have as a one president. So I am asking, yes, again, for your votes. But I want your commitment for the next 3 years. I want a commitment to work together. I want a commitment to dedicate more time for IPU. If we really want to be a good observer for UN, we need to prepare our resolutions. We need to prepare what the commissions or the president or whoever is going to represent IPU is going to say in the name of our organization, because he's not going to represent her or himself. We need to dedicate time, effort. We need to prepare those contents. I am going to give an example. Next year, and it is being prepared right now, but next year is going to be addressed at UN, the Global Pact for Migrations and Refugees. That is one of the most important challenges for our world. What are the parliamentarians of the world going to say at UN? Is that seat going to be empty, or it's going to be well represented? If we want to have a good representation, again, I expect 3 years of hard work. I expect your good hearts, and I expect your very clear minds.
Thank you. We'll move on to the question from Sudan, but just as a break, not from the session, I've had a very interesting note. It's from a troublemaker. He or she calls himself. I will not identify him or her, and I will read the note. It is good to have a woman president. It is also good to recognize the important role of young people. But may I ask, what about people who are neither young nor a woman? Are they garbage or dead wood? What would the candidates do about this? So this is also something that has come through. So we keep in mind that it's a constituency which is very inclusive. It's a very broad spectrum. Of course, you're not dead wood. Of course, you're not garbage. And I'm sure you are as important as everyone else. So I would ask the two candidates to quickly respond to the question from Sudan. Gabriela, would you like to go first?
Well, there are several questions from Sudan, so I will try to be fast. First of all, about the languages. I really believe that IPU should be more inclusive. I'm aware of that. I am part of a geopolitical group who does receive some translation, but 2 or 3 days later. I'm grateful with my parents because I have taught English, but in other case, I am promising to learn French, but that's when you have a good opportunity. So we need to give opportunities to those persons, those colleagues who doesn't speak French or English. Let's put that in numbers. Spanish is the 4th largest language spoken in the world. Arabic is the 5th. Portuguese is being spoken by the same number of persons that are French-speaking. So it's about inclusiveness, and of course, it's about fairness. So not everything represents to use IPU budget. We need to be creative. For example, and I am speaking, having the Spanish delegation here, I am absolutely sure that Instituto Cervantes will be more than happy to cooperate with IPU to have some translations for Spanish. They are making huge cooperation, a lot of Instituto Cervantes around the world, so I believe that we can have some opportunities with cooperation. The same, for example, with Instituto Camões, Portuguese. And what about the Arab? Come on, some Arab countries are developing, Emirates, our webpage. So we are already having a very strong cooperation with some countries. It is about being, again, creative. I want to say yes to all the good things that my colleagues propose. I want an IPU enthusiastic and creative. And about the application of international instruments, I believe that's part of our important responsibility. We need to ratify the instruments, and of course we need to make that follow-up. It's not about going back to the national parliaments and to raise our hands and vote something we don't understand. It's about creating a commitment between our countries and the global arena. If we are going to be part of UN, let's do things right. And of course, let's develop some seminars here at IPU or during the hearings we have at UN to be with very specialized persons that can give us the tools and the knowledge to address that better legislation in our national parliament. For not women and not young parliamentarians, I think this is an amazing question because we usually focus our attention in the groups who are not well represented. But the majority of our membership sometimes is not women and is not young parliamentarians. So we must do something also for men and for not that young parliamentarians, maybe young in their hearts, but sometimes age doesn't lie. Regardless of our gender or our age, we need to improve our own capacities. We need to establish cooperation with universities, think tanks, with several kinds of institutions. IPU already has a very good network with persons from universities from almost all around the world. We need to improve our own capacities. Knowledge changes every day. Technology is changing the world every day. New forms of campaigns, new tools for communications, new concepts at the different international laws. So let's create a good platform for capacity building online, or even if we find the scholarships in the same universities that will help, I believe, really happily the parliamentarians of all the world.
Thank you, Gabriela. Yvonne, very quickly, I'm also looking at the time because we're a little bit pressed. Yvonne, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, I think what is most important is to make sure that on our agendas we note down the idea that ability and experience isn't only to do with gender or age. What we have to do is to ensure that we do have the capacity on the one hand. We have to acquire experience as well. But we can add to that through having women and young people involved. But what really matters is that we're more democratic. You can't have full democracy if you are not also ensuring there is respect for women, respect for young people, and of course for the elderly as well, because they have their experience too. Why do we want the presence of women? Why have the IPU promoted that? And personally, I think it's important is that we share power. I want to share power myself with men. That's where the discussion lies. That is where the decisions are taken. I don't want to turn myself into a number on a voting list, that is there just to promote women and then nothing happens. No, I want to be there where those decisions are taken. And this is something that we need to carry on promoting so that we do have this very democratic view, a very inclusive view, young and gender, and we don't say that it just has to be experienced, but although that does need to be taken into account too, everything needs to be taken into account. Thank you. I would like to thank you all for the questions that have been asked. As Gabriela said, tomorrow is the day to express ourselves, and I think we ought to really congratulate ourselves on the method that we have here in the IPU, and I think that it is really great that we have the two female candidates here, that two women are standing. Thank you.
Both of our candidates. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, we wanted to give you an opportunity to interact with the candidates. We also wanted to see how the two candidates interact amongst themselves. I think that's the idea of having this session. You've asked some exceptional questions, and I'm glad that I'm not running, because if I was asked those questions 3 years back, I'm not sure how well I could have answered. So congratulations to both of our candidates. Just a few thoughts, trying to share with you the benefit of my experience. Some of the questions that you have asked, I think, assumes that the presidency of the IPU is an executive presidency. It is not. This is not the president of a country trying to bring about huge changes. So the expectation bar should not be too high. We have the statutes, we have the membership, so we need to find the compromise. And yet, as both of the candidates have said, we have to move on. We cannot be stuck where we are. And it is my belief that hopefully I am leaving with a better IPU than what I inherited. And I'm sure the candidates that we have amongst us, whoever is successful, will also leave a better IPU than what I have given to them. That's how we move forward. So for us, I think the public face of IPU is, of course, important, and that's the president. It's not a full-time job, but it is a full-time commitment. You have to understand that. The job is actually done by the Secretariat as per the direction of the Council, but your commitment, your devotion, your thought process as a president has to be full-time. You really have to be involved. You have to understand the pulse of the membership. Another very important quality is going to be the art of compromise, because it's not just coming and speaking in public, it is also to preside over the meeting of the Executive Committee. And we have various geopolitical groups there. Finding the compromise amongst the various geopolitical groups, being able to understand the pulse of what people are saying, and then to find a consensus and a way forward. So these are, I think, also very important challenges that the president will have. But the important thing is, I think the IPU is better positioned, it is better equipped, it is better in terms of membership than ever before. Here in St. Petersburg, we are welcoming new members. We have had the highest level of interest in terms of speakers and deputy speakers. We have a number of issues, whether it is nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, whether it is climate change, whether it is sustainable development, whether it is disaster risk reduction. So as long as we are able to make a change in the lives of the people that we represent, then I think we will have done a good job. So I wish both of the candidates the very best. Please remember the voting starts at 9. You will not see the end of me after the voting. I will actually continue till the end of the assembly. Whoever is the winner will be invited to say a few words. And I thank you for all the support and cooperation that you've extended. If we have made progress, and the consensus is that we have, it is not because of me as a president, it is because of you as members. You have driven, you have enriched the process, you have helped me to learn about democracy and how we should move forward as an organization. So I thank you for that. So have a great evening, and we will see you all tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you.